Let a sister know when we are live. I appreciate it. All right. Hi, YouTube. Hope everybody's doing all right. We have a lot to discuss. Welcome to the Lurie Daniel Favors Show on SiriusXM's Urban View, channel 126. Those of you who are following me know that I did a super mini live this morning. It was super mini. And you didn't know it if you weren't following me because you're not following me. You should be. But in that mini live, I told you that we had some things to talk about today. And that wasn't just hype to get y'all to pay attention to the fact that we were going live at around 11 today. That was literally because of what the Supreme Court did last night. Now, I just want to start by saying we know the Supreme Court is trash. The Supreme Court is compromised. It's a bunch of trash-ass trashness, except for the saving grace of my favorite justices, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, Justice Ilana Kagan, and queen of my favorites, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. And not just because she's amazing and has sister locks and is dope and wears glasses, but because she's smart as fuck and I love her. But we got to talk today about what the Supreme Court did, the majority, which is trash, what they did yesterday. And these sorts of decisions are why I come up with little jingles like Clarence Thomas is a hoe and talk about, Clarence Thomas and his wife Ginny and Sam Alito and his wife Martha and how they're all pimping the Supreme Court for billionaires like Harlan Crow. And then I talk about why they hoes. Like I got to do that because of what they did last night. But they hoeing isn't just about their personal gain. At this point, their hoeing is basically about allowing the complete revitalization of white nationalist policing. The type of policing where police have unlimited of immunity, which is something that Donald Trump said for years that he wanted. We've known that he wanted that since his first presidency. We know that Project 2025 envisioned full police immunity. We know that we read the entire Project 2025, so we were crystal clear about what they were going to do when it came to the policing apparatus and what they wanted to do with the Fourth Amendment in particular. Some of you may be wondering, what does all of this have to do with each other? Give me a minute. I'm going to break it on down. Now, you may recall that the Fourth Amendment, pretty important amendment, the Fourth Amendment is the one that prevents against unreasonable search and seizure. And the reason that matters is because what used to happen was basically anybody could just bust up in your house if they were a part of the government and take what they wanted, right? There was this time, particularly during the Revolutionary War, where you would have to quarter a soldier. And a soldier at this point was like the British soldier, because if you were here in America fighting, you were fighting against the British because you were trying to be free, even though you was enslaving Africans and genocide and the indigenous. But basically, British soldiers could just come into your home and you would have to take care of them. They would be able to just live in your house and you would have to put them up because that was your obligation as still a British citizen, even though you were a British citizen vis-a-vis the crown. And so the Fourth Amendment sort of has its roots in recognizing this hostile, extreme nature in which the government, the state, the militarized arm of the state can just bust up in your house and take your shit, right? And so the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution protects you from, quote, unreasonable search and seizures by the government. It requires warrants to be issued based on probable cause, and the warrants have to specifically describe the place that is going to be searched, or the persons who are going to be seized. And the Fourth Amendment is basically what those of us who are fighting for police reform were using as our backstop, because if you live in a place like New York City, for years, you were hearing this phrase called stop and frisk, maybe stop, question, and frisk. But basically, stop and frisk was this rule. It was unconstitutional and it was outlawed until Eric Adams, the black mayor currently in office, brought it back because he's a former police officer. And we have seen what that does for us. Because remember, blackness is not a civic skill and it is insufficient as a measure for whether or not you are a good leader. But basically, Eric Adams and bringing back unconstitutional, violating racist policing practices back aside, what we had during stop and frisk was a situation where you had over 500,000 New Yorkers who were being stopped, questioned, and frisked by police at any given point in a year. And 85% of them were black and brown. Now, interesting thing about that is 85% of the New York City population is not black and brown. Black people make up a good 22%. Used to be 25% before elected officials stopped doing anything to keep black people in their homes. And a whole lot of black people had to leave New York City and no longer live here anymore. And now they're not even a part of your voting base. And a lot of you are wondering why it's harder for you to win elections against candidates coming out of like the Democratic Socialist Party. That might be why, but that too is another aside. The reality is black people make up maybe 22, maybe 23% of the New York City population, and I think that's a stretch. Latinos make another 25%, a little bit higher perhaps, because their numbers are growing at a slightly faster rate because, again, black people have to leave because nobody's keeping them in their homes. Shout out to all of you elected officials who could have done something to prevent that but didn't. Moving on. What we had is a city that was less than 50% black and brown, but 85% of the people being stopped, questioned, and frisked by police were black and brown. Now, here's where the data gets really interesting. Organizations like the New York Civil Liberties Union, they did some studies, and what they determined was that out of the people who were being stopped, questioned, and frisked under these policies, 85% of whom were black and brown, out of the people who were stopped, 9 out of 10 of them were being released with no desk appearance ticket, no summons, or no other form of arrest, which means that when they were being stopped, questioned, and frisked by police officers, they were being stopped, questioned, and frisked for the crime of just being black and brown because they weren't actually doing anything else wrong. But the data also determined that when they were stopped, questioning, and frisking white people, the few times that happened, they were actually giving them desk appearance tickets and additional forms of intervention, because when they were stopping white people, it was actually on the basis of credibly suspecting that some sort of criminal activity was afoot. And so those searches, those seizures of their persons, their stop, question, and frisk on the sidewalk was valid. It was wholly invalid against the overwhelming majority of black and brown people. Now, what does that tell us? That tells us that, well, a couple of things. Number one, it tells us that being black and brown was a source of being, I'm sorry, no. It's not that being black and brown was the source of terrorism. White people's racism and the racism of police officers who were trained, whether they were black and brown or not, officers who might have come from our communities, but who were trained in a white nationalist approach to policing and who did not have enough race consciousness to reject that white nationalist approach to policing. When you were engaging in white nationalist approaches to policing, you were stopping, questioning, and frisking black and brown people, terrorizing them. And it is a terror because if 500,000 white New Yorkers were being stopped, questioned, and frisked, and at the end of that encounter with police, they were being let go with no desk appearance ticket, no arrest, no nothing, we would call that terrorism because it's terrorism. But when it happens to us, it's just good old-fashioned policing. This matters because of what the Supreme Court did last night. We had to go into court, and I'm not saying we as in Lurie, I'm talking about coalitions of organizations and individuals went into court. Organizations, shout out to the Malcolm X grassroots movement, shout out to the organizations that were leading the charge, the NYCLU and the local groups that were doing the CPRs and all the groups that were on the ground doing this work, and had to fight to recognize that this is a terroristic approach to policing, and we know it's racist terrorism because you don't police white people in the same way. And yesterday, the Supreme Court basically said, you know that thing that they used to do in New York City called stop and frisk that the courts have all agreed is unconstitutional because it's racial profiling? We cool with it. We cool with it because we are the Supreme Court. They basically shredded what was left of the Fourth Amendment and gave ICE, Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement agents, an essential green light to do whatever sort of racial profile policing that they want to. Now, Donald Trump used to talk about the fact that he wanted unlimited, full immunity, unqualified, unlimited immunity for police officers. The court didn't specifically speak to that in this opinion. But the way that this opinion has been issued, it is essentially, I think we would be foolish not to see this as also giving blanket permission for any policing apparatus or agency to engage in the most disgusting pro-slave era racial profiling, fugitive slave hunting, bounty hunting, catching practices that we have ever known. Now, in a 6-3 ruling that came down from the shadow docket, which means they didn't even talk extensively within the opinions about what they were doing. The shadow docket is basically Donald Trump. Whenever Donald Trump gets in trouble and he gets in trouble with the courts, he goes running like a little bitch to the Supreme Court to basically get the Supreme Court to undo what the other courts did. And the other courts are like, what the fuck are you doing, Supreme Court? You know good and goddamn well this is unlawful. It violates precedent. We're sending you the cases. These lower court judges are doing everything they can, including calling on the name of Black Jesus and saying, he tie my bow tie, I'm arriving in a Hyundai, to speak in tongues, pouring anointed oil over these opinions to make it crystal clear to the Supreme Court why they cannot rule in opposition to what they did. And the Supreme Court, because it's populated and run by hoes, is basically like, yeah, I know what the law says and I know what we're supposed to do, but we don't give a damn because we are sucking that Trump nut. Sorry, I know that would create an image that nobody wants to see and can likely unsee. But this is where we're at. The shadow docket is how the Supreme Court does that. And they take these opinions that lower courts send them that everybody who's ever studied the law with any level of fidelity knows the lower court was correct. And the Supreme Court's like, no, because we want the white nationalists to win. The institution of the Supreme Court is run by white nationalists. And the three justices who are doing everything they can to hold on to democracy are being outvoted every single time. According to the reports, there was a district judge who decided that the ICE raids that were taking place in Los Angeles, which are about to be replicated now with no limitations, essentially in Chicago and everywhere else that Donald Trump says that he's trying to do this at. Because we see what's happening in Washington, D.C. And I told y'all what my sister friend said. She was like, yeah, we had the battle for L.A. Now it's the battle for D.C. It's finna be the battle for Chicago, the battle for New York. I tell you what, let Zohran Mamdani win the mayoral election the next day. Be ready for ICE to come sweep up in New York City the way they have other places. If they haven't already, I actually thought they were going to come during the West Indian Day Parade. I guess that was a little too on the nose. Thank God that did not happen. But the district judge, and her name is Mamie Ewusi Mensah Frimpong, she found at the district court level that ICE raids in Los Angeles were, quote, conducted illegally and in direct violation of the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Her order specifically prohibited ICE from using 4 racially charged justifications for arrests. A person's apparent ethnicity is the first one, the language that they speak, their presence at a location frequented by immigrants, or their line of work. Those were the 4 things that the judge was like, you can't use that as a reason for violating somebody's Fourth Amendment rights, for arresting them, for holding them, for placing them in a deportation car or bus or truck or van or whatever the hell it is. You can't do that. It's a violation of their rights. So the Trump administration did what they did. They ran to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was like, is there anything we can do for you, massa? Anything at all? And basically Trump was like, yeah, I need this decision undone. Brett Kavanaugh, Beer Kavanaugh. Did anybody ever figure out who took care of over almost $1 million worth of debt before he was confirmed? Did anybody ever figure out who paid for that? Because I know he wasn't making that money working for the Justice Department. So weird how his debt just disappeared at the same time that he was being credibly accused of sexually assaulting multiple women, many of whom did not even get called up to testify at his hearing. Weird how that happens. Anyway, he's on the Supreme Court now, and he wrote an opinion that basically, according to this report, quote, reads like a user's manual for constitutional erosion. He, talking about Brett Kavanaugh, argues that the Immigration and Nationality Act allows agents to, quote, interrogate any alien or person believed to be an alien, and the totality of the circumstances could justify a stop. And what are those circumstances? Well, according to the justice, those circumstances include if you're in an area with a high immigrant population, if you're working in jobs like landscaping or construction, or if you're coming from Mexico or Central America, and you're not speaking much English. Now, some of you out there are like, oh, phew, they're just talking about the Latinos. Child, what is you had me all worried up here talking about we was going to be stopping, questioned, and frisked and whatnot. It's just the Latinos. Have you ever met a black Latino? Shocking how black they look. It's like as if you saw somebody you thought their name was like Raheem or Michael or Derek, and their name is Rafael Miguel Derrito. I don't think Dorito is actually a Spanish name. I couldn't remember what the Spanish version of Derek would be, so I just made that up. Sorry, it's a Spanish-speaking people. That's not actually a name. I've never met a Spanish person named Dorito, but I met plenty of black Spanish people, plenty of black Latinos. In fact, being an Afro-Latino is an entire identity that is growing in recognition, and it makes sense that we have an entire identity known as Afro-Latino because over 90% of the enslaved Africans who were trafficked from the continent of Africa never came to these United States. They went to Spanish-speaking, Portuguese-speaking places, some French-speaking spaces like Haiti, but that's why the largest population of black people outside of the continent of Africa is in Brazil. Just like the nation of Brazil. So we should know these things. Have you ever realized, for those of you who have met a black who you found out later was Latino, have you ever noticed how you didn't know they was Latino unless they said something like, instead of rice on peas, which is what we might say in Jamaica, in my mother's country, they might say arroz con pollo, right? Chicken and rice. Whereas if you from the South, where my daddy's family's from by way of New York, South Carolina first by way of New York, you going to have some red beans and rice, right? It's all the same thing, but it's just a little bit different. We might use some Lowry's down in the South. Or we might use some adobo or sofrito in the Dominican Republic. It's all the same thing. We just use different phrases for it because we have all been internalizing white supremacy. We don't necessarily like each other a whole lot because of the diaspora wars, but that's also not our fault. But we should just recognize that too, the diaspora wars are a white man-made creation to basically keep us so busy fighting each other that we forget who the real source of the issue is. That's a conversation for another day. The point is that in his passage, Brett Kavanaugh says the following, quote, To be clear, apparent ethnicity alone cannot furnish reasonable suspicion under this court's case law regarding immigration stops. However, it can be a relevant factor when considered along with other salient factors, which basically means this is the Supreme Court that said you cannot use race or anything related to race to deal with college admissions or job promotions or to talk about how to have diversity, equity, and inclusive workspaces, but you can definitely use race to arrest a motherfucker. You can do that. You can do that. And the other reason this matters is because we're in a moment right now where the Supreme Court, and this is according to upriseri.com, really great article, opinion piece that I thought was really good. They basically said the following quote: "This is legal hair splitting designed to mask the odious reality. The Supreme Court has just sanctioned a dragnet based on racist stereotypes. It has declared that looking or sounding a certain way makes you a target." Now, for all my "it's just the Latinos, it ain't us foundational Black Americans," come to the front of the class, please. I'd like to see you and you. You right there. All of the foundational Black Americans who said this is about Latinos, not us. Do you really think, my friends, you really think that the ICE agent or the Proud Boy in a mask working with the ICE agent or the Ku Klux Klan Grand Dragon Masters, whatever you want to call them, or just your local police, you think they gonna distinguish? You think they think you look American? Let's think about it. Do you think that to the average white nationalist police officer, and we got to say it that way because we already knew from the Department of Homeland Security back in 2006 and 2007 that the police departments across the nation and the military under which the nation sits, that those were the primary spaces for white nationalist recruitment and training programs. So to the average white nationalist police officer, do you think the average foundational Black American looks like what that racist police officer think an American looks like? Not in your eyes where you are claiming this land as your own, not in your eyes, in the eyes of the racist white nationalist police officer. Do you think that your Black ass look like what they think about when they think about who is an American? Because the reality is there's a whole lot of people who are saying, we're phenotypically different. And I've seen a whole lot of y'all commentary online, and I talk about this a lot more in the podcast episode, which will come out today. Lurie Breaks It Down is the name of the podcast. You should get a copy or you should download it and enjoy it. But I talk about this today. There's some of y'all out there in my foundational Black American spaces who believe that you can tell a nationality by a hairline. Have you seen these comments? To those of you in Urban View, have y'all seen these comments where people are like, I can tell you're not American because look at the way your jawline looks. You stupid ass. You're so fucking dumb. Do you know how stupid that sounds? It sounds as stupid as the Belgians coming into what would then become Rwanda and using their little measuring tapes to measure the width of a nose or the length of a forehead to determine who was really a Hutu and who was really a Tutsi, and give one of them weapons and make one of them the enemy and then make them fight against each other while we, the white Belgians, just come in and steal all of the goods and all of the resources and the riches that the African continent has to bear. And are we worried about the brutes who are fighting each other, the Houthis and the Tutsis? Of course not. We're not worried about them. They're too busy fighting each other with the weapons we gave them. So we have the ability to steal all the wealth. That's how stupid you sound. You sound that stupid when you talk about, I can tell you're not really a foundational Black American because of the way your lips part. Friends, I just want to ask you, regardless of whether you think you can determine the phenotypical differences between, say, a Haitian or, say, a Gullah Geechee member or somebody from Barbados, even though you say that you can do that, I would just say, here's just a pro tip. When you're trying to use white supremacist talking points to be a Black nativist in a country that neither you nor your oppressors are native to, you have not only lost the plot, but you've also proved you don't know how to read. And so we got to deal with these realities because there's a lot of people right now, it's not us, it's them. It's you. It's all of us. We're all in this situation together. And if you think I'm being a little hyperbolic, let's look at what was happening. In fact, I'm going to share my screen. If you could please pull the clip. Hold on, which clip is it? I want to make sure I get you the right one. Please pull, not the one from Instagram, NBC Bay Area. This is what just happened as a result of yesterday's opinion. This is how people are already reacting. And this is what's taking place in these communities where people are very crystal clear. They already know what's finna happen. They're scared shitless. And now we all get to think about what's going to happen when it looks like, what it's going to look like when it happens in our communities. Let's take a listen.
Critics are calling it legalized profiling. The U.S. Supreme Court lifted a lower court's restriction on so-called roving ICE raids in Los Angeles. This all began when immigration advocates filed a suit to block ICE agents from stopping people solely based on the language they talk or where they might be standing. Tonight, the ruling is reverberating across the country. As NBC Bay Area's Damian Trujillo tells us, it's already sparking fear among immigrants here in the Bay Area. Damian joins us.
Observers say it's palpable. Fewer shoppers at cultural shopping centers like this one all across the country, and many fear it will only get worse after today's Supreme Court ruling. They used to be some of the busiest shopping centers in the Bay Area, but now observers say people are too afraid to come out to these cultural grocery stores.
Labor.
There is a similar drop in day worker traffic at this San Jose Home Depot.
A lot of these guys are on edge, though. Yeah.
You can see it?
Yeah, they're on edge. They listen to the news and read the newspaper.
Ben Torres is a U.S. citizen, and he's out here with the other day workers looking for a job. The workers here fear today's Supreme Court ruling will send more into hiding. Hector Alvarado says the fear is real and about to get worse with the High Court ruling, allowing ICE to conduct roving patrols and stop people at will without probable cause.
It's obviously feels like a gut punch to a lot of people that are immigration advocates.
Immigration lawyer Andrew Newcomb says the ruling doesn't eliminate Fourth Amendment rights for immigrants, but it did stop an emergency protective order that a lower court judge put in place, blocking the roving patrols.
The Bill of Rights, all of the constitutional amendments apply to everyone that is here in the United States. What we've been seeing with the Trump administration is an attempt to stress test different constitutional protections.
In a statement, Governor Gavin Newsom said Trump's hand-picked Supreme Court majority just became the grand marshal for a parade of racial terror in Los Angeles. Immigration and Customs Enforcement reports that in fiscal year 24 and so far in 2025, agents have arrested more than 140,000 people, a figure many fear will go up drastically with today's ruling. In the South Bay, Damian Trujillo, NBC Bay Area News.
And so what are you going to do, and how are you changing your conversations with your kids about how they interact with the police? Right now, to be clear, this is a little late to me. I kind of thought this was going to happen a little sooner because I was very worried about the summertime. And y'all remember me talking about the fact that I'm nervous about this summer because if we have unlimited police immunity and our kids is out there with no summer camp or funding or programs and whatnot, I was very concerned about this. This decision is now going to create a situation where all of that can happen. And it's not just the Latinos. I really, really, really need us to be crystal clear. This is not going to stay limited to the Latino community. And we have already seen examples of Black Americans who were arrested and held for lengthy periods of time. Eventually, they made it out, though they were in deportation centers. But when you're in a deportation center and you're screaming, I'm an American, and you're surrounded by hundreds of other people who have been arrested, others of whom are Americans or think they're Americans, and everyone's screaming, I'm an American, I'm not supposed to be here. But you don't have your passport, you don't have your birth certificate, because when you had them on you with you because your parents were listening to the Lurie Daniel Favors show, and I'm telling people you better make sure you got your ID, you got to make sure that you got what you need in order to prove who you are. The officer who arrested you just tossed that shit out the window, and now you don't know where your passport's at. It's probably been stolen by somebody who's getting off with your benefits. They done took your birth certificate and tossed that too. You're locked up. Maybe you get out in a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe like some folks a couple of months. Do you still have a job after that? What's the situation of your relationship with your kids after that? Have you been traumatized while you were incarcerated? Because everybody who's coming out of these incarceration spaces and these immigration holds is talking about it like it was some torture ass shit that was going on. So there are a lot of people who hear this. Actually, you know what? Let me continue this. There are a lot of people who hear something like this and they say, Lurie, I'm staying and fighting. This is my land. I'm staying here. I'm fighting here. My ancestors were born here. They died here, and I'm going to fight. Okay. I respect it. I'm not here to try to convince you otherwise. What is the current nature? And this is a rhetorical question. What's the current nature of your fight right now? For everybody saying I'm staying to fight. Now, I'm not trying to convince you to leave. I'm saying if you have said you're going to stay, because I ain't got nowhere to go and I ain't got nowhere to send you. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But for those who have said I'm going to stay and fight, are you currently fighting? Like, is that happening right now? Like, are you meeting? Are you organizing? Have you figured out where in your community are going to be the best places for your underground railroad stations? Because part of being in war, and these people have declared war, part of being in war is recognizing not just where you're strong, but recognizing when you're weak. If you got to retreat, have you thought about what that looks like? Have you thought about the infrastructure of getting people into safety while you're staying and fighting with whomever you're staying and fighting with? And I'm assuming you're training right now. I'm assuming you're organizing and you're engaged in this work, because if you're going to stay and fight against these people who are active, they are organized, they've been training militarily, legally, they got the legal arguments, they got briefs ready, they got all that, they are ready to go. Are you? Like, are we? And this is something that I'd mentioned with our guest that we just had on, Chris Figueroa, Melody Fields Figueroa, and we were talking about like people of our community who are in isolation. Several years ago, we had somebody on the show. Actually, we had a couple of incidences. I was thinking not of Miss Alpha, but we've had, so those of you who are part of the Urban View family, you remember Miss Alpha. Miss Alpha was somebody who lived in a part of California where she was by herself as one of the only black people. She was surrounded by a lot of Trump people, and she was a poll worker. She was very worried about going to work in the polls. This was just last year, actually. And so one of the audience members was listening to her. Shout out to Bernard. And Bernard drove 2 hours up the coast to find Miss Alpha to get her, escort her to the poll site so she could work. He sat out in that poll site parking lot the entire day, made sure she got home, and that's what community does for each other, right? But we have had other callers into this show who have indicated like, I'm the only one in my community. I'm the only one at my job. I'm the only black person who lives in this space. And to you, I say, why? Number one, did you not see the writing on the wall? Writing so clear. It's written in multiple languages and we can read all of them. Get out. Jordan Peele, he wrote a whole movie about it. Get out. Because if you are in an isolated space with this level of proactive white nationalist Klansman activity from the Supreme Court on down, where the policing apparatus is going to have full immunity and there is no Fourth Amendment protections against unlawful search and seizure, and you are just a little black duck sitting in front of all of this, you better get out. You better get out. And here's the thing. If you stay, just at a certain point, whenever somebody gets warning about a hurricane coming and you choose to say, at a certain point, the emergency services say, we're not coming to get you. So just know it's going to be you and them floodwaters, you and that wind, you and that rain. Go with God. Because if you are in this day of White Nationalist Project 2025, still one of the only black families in your entire community, in your neighborhood, in your region of the state, you either got a death wish or you know something that the rest of us don't know, and I wish you could share a little bit of it with us. But I want you to take a look at this last video. This is from, what is this account? I love this account, Silent Middle Child, for those of you who are on Instagram. Silent Middle Child, amazing conversations that they have. You're going to hear a voice off camera. This is the older sister who's asking her brother, who's the middle child, who has got a lot of really good insight into a number of things as he's playing a video game. This is kind of how all their videos sort of look. And I want you to take a listen to this conversation that they're going to have about what this decision is going to lead to ultimately. YouTube, I'm going to share my screen. Let's take a listen.
Hey, Anthony.
Yeah.
What do you think about today's Supreme Court ruling on ICE raids?
Well, they basically threw out the Fourth Amendment and said it's okay for ICE and other law enforcement to racially profile people. And if you combine that with the Trump administration's continuing efforts to deport people without due process to third-party countries, you basically have a mechanism to arrest and deport anybody for looking Latino or having an accent or potentially just speaking a different language. And I'm sure that's not going to stay restricted to Latinos for long. We all know how fascism loves enemies.
What does the ruling say exactly?
Well, the ruling itself didn't say much of anything. It was simply a reversal of another lower court injunction without any accompanying explanation by the Supreme Court. But the lower court injunction was basically placed on ICE, saying that they were illegally profiling people, basically accusing them of being illegal immigrants simply because they looked Hispanic, they had an accent, or they were in certain locations like, let's say, Home Depot or car washes. literally racially profiling, right? And that is against the Fourth Amendment of unreasonable search and seizure. You have to have actual, concrete proof or strong suspicion of something to arrest somebody. That ruling put a pause on the ICE raids. ICE has basically been out of LA for the last 3 weeks, not completely gone, but the thousands of officers that we saw before are left. And the Trump administration appealed to the Supreme Court about that, and the Supreme Court reversed that. So they're basically saying it is okay to arrest people or detain them for looking Hispanic, for having an accent, for speaking Spanish, or for working or being in certain locations that are typically associated with illegal immigrants. There's no reason for them to have reversed this ruling. So, this is them saying that it's okay for ICE to terrorize Hispanic communities and basically anybody that doesn't look like Stephen Miller's idea of what an American should look like, and will, I'm sure, lead to many more illegal and extrajudicial deportations of people that were U.S. citizens or here legally, right? We've already seen that happen. They've already, even before this ruling, tried or succeeded in several cases deporting U.S. citizens or people that were not actually illegal immigrants. And this is an agreement from the Supreme Court that it's basically okay to do that. So we're going to see a huge increase in that. And when you combine that with the recent renaming of the Department of Defense to the Department of War, Trump talking about going to war on Chicago, the ICE presence in that area and increasing ICE presence in other cities, I think we can all see where the wind is blowing.
And it ain't blowing nowhere good. It ain't blowing nowhere good at all. So listen, I, as much as anybody else, am optimistic. I am a pragmatic optimist to the best of my ability. I really am. But one thing, and I've said this before, that we have to be very clear about. There are very few things that have served to keep a check or lid on the explicit violence of white nationalism in this country. In fact, out of the past 400 years, there have been very few things that have kept a lid on the explosive power of violent white nationalism and its accompanying violence in this country. Number one was a set of legal rules that were going to ensure that being racist in public or exhibiting racist behaviors and providing racial harm against people was going to have a legal consequence. That's the first thing. And then a government that was going to enforce that legal consequence. That's the second thing. The third thing is a sense of shame, because there was a period for most of my life where one of the worst things that could happen to a white was being considered a racist. Certainly being called a racist in public was just absolutely devastating and could be destructive to one's entire white esteem. That sense of shame, that please don't call me a racist. You can do anything, but don't call me racist. Please don't call me racist. That shit is dead. They don't care. There's no longer a legal framework preventing racist acts or behaviors, or at the very least even attempting to punish racist acts and behaviors. There is no longer a federal government that is going to enforce what laws still might exist that would punish racist acts and behaviors and other forms of discrimination, either in our personal spaces, in our business spaces, in the workplaces. But now they ain't even got the shame. They're proud about it. They're returning to what their ancestors' wildest dreams were. And I don't know that we've yet figured out what our path forward looks like, because for most of us, our path forward is based on integration, right? Like for most of us, our path forward is we're here, things are not great, but we're going to make it work because, like most victims of domestic violence, we believe that at least up until this point, we can make this work. But what happens when you can't? What happens when the federal government, when the highest court in the land, and the military are essentially in alignment that not only are they going to make America great, I can't say again, but for them, making America great means making it white manistan. And I don't know that a whole lot of us seriously have a plan to navigate that. We are going to get ready to go to commercial break. YouTube, appreciate y'all. We got a lot to figure out. Most of it, this is just about asking questions. I need you all to go to your home spaces and figure these conversations out like I have to, because